take a seat, feeling comfortable, I would say I'd start. We talk about configuration. I personally am currently working for Credit Suisse. That's one of the 2 big banks in Switzerland. I do there some technical coordination and work there as a technical architect. I'm also leading the specification for the Java Money. And I also drive that configuration aspect and try to get somehow to improve things there in that area. You see here Google Twitter, Google handle, whatever you like. When you have questions about configuration, everything, use the @stick at javanet or the @sticks at gmail.com, which is much better than the company address, because the company address will go under with all the other emails, and so it's better separated. I also engaged somehow at Zurich Switzerland, especially I'm organizing the Hackergardens in Zurich, but for you here it's not that relevant, so go ahead. Agenda. We talk first about what is configuration at all, because we will see it might be not that easy. We talk about typical use cases, what things are to configure. We will then look at existing approaches. I will strive both Java Enterprise Edition as well as SE, the standard platform aspects. We will then have some summary, and what's completely new will be the last part about Apache Tamaya. And if you have enough time, I can add you or give you a short demo out of the code, which will then go into that Apache project. So starting, defining the problem. Basically, looking at configuration, when you ask 100 people, I would say there's a good chance that you will get about 100 different opinions what configuration is, for what it should be used or not used. So we will have different stakeholders. And also different views. For example, you can say, okay, I need to have some configuration to setting up my server environment. So configuring, for example, things that then will be executed within Docker or with Puppet or whatever. Also, I have then, for example, configuration aspects that would go more into the application server, the low-level stuff, which ports I should open, with which other application servers I should talk, with which LDAP server my security environment is connected, for example. You can go ahead then above the stack and looking at the deployment descriptors within your EARs, within your vars, which are then configuration. Then you go into the CDI stuff. Also there, you have CDI-specific things, that beans XML files, for example, which are doing stuff. Then you have, of course, all the stuff with that administrative stuff in the application server, data sources, message queues, whatever, or even scripting facilities, being in Java, being outside of the Java VM. So we will have very, very different granularities, completely different varying levels of applicability, and also typically completely different formats and locations where configuration is or is read from. That's one of the background why it is so difficult to find something like common sense. What is configuration? Going even deeper into the use cases aspects, let's go just through some possible use cases. As I said, okay, you have some staging environment configuration that could be for one application, or you want to have configuration that is generalized, basically shared across multiple applications. You want, for example, have different deployment profiles because you have the local developer workspace, you will have some integration test environments, then you go, for example, to acceptance test environments where you possibly have then different services connected until you then end up in the production system. And when you're looking then at, for example, at the things how in Java EE things may be built, we will see some interesting aspects what can be done there later. But of course, when you're thinking of the deployment descriptors, most people think, okay, I have to open somehow the ear, change then the things there, repackage it. That is not what you typically wanted to do. When you then think about customer off-the-shelf software, where some companies provide you, let's say, an ear, you try to get that ear running on your application servers, and now something is not working as you would expect. And perhaps if you would have some general mechanism of configuring things, you could then adapt that solution that it is doing what you would them it to do. If you don't have that solution, typically you have to call the vendor and say, please vendor, give me another version that is not running in our environment, which adds costs, makes it cumbersome. When then you think of configuration at the different locations of it, you can have deployment descriptors in your ear, you can have files that are going more, is part of the web, will be end up in the web server installation on a domain configuration of your application server. You can have even things that may be available or managed remotely, perhaps in a database. It just depends also what you are doing, because there are different kinds of levels of configuration. But when you go up the stack and just you are owning your own code, you can do what you want. You can pull out your configuration to GitHub and make it public to everyone. Nobody will prevent you from doing that. Next is that often configuration is somehow scoped. There may be parts of configuration that may be sensitive, so not everybody should have access to it. Passwords, for example, that you need, for example, to connecting to some third-party services outside of your company, for example. And when you're looking at that thing, also even when you then put together the configuration, you typically do not want the passwords in plain text, so you possibly want to have some encryption, decryption, protecting mechanism in place. Then next area of interest is how do you access configuration? Just configuration, as said, so is an abstract construct, so you have to have something where you can connect with your code. And basically you have two, let's say, basic mechanisms. The old style, the whole legacy style is you go somewhere and say some configuration service, please configuration service, give me configuration. Then you are even lucky because sometimes you even have to say, please configuration service, give me configuration ABC, and then you have to know which is ABC because the API is not well designed or whatever. In the best case or more modern case, you definitely would not do it that way. You would use CDI, and when your managed bean is within that CDI lifecycle, you can simply inject that configuration values somehow. A third variant is that you more or less, that could be done with injection as well as with the service location part, is that you have something like templates. You will see that in a later slide that we have an interface, and the configuration service basically is implementing your interface, and the interface gives you, in a type-safe way, back the values that you want to have configured. Then going ahead, when we just end up on, let's say, on the web application layer in an application server, that may still not be the end of the story. Your web application may be a SaaS solution, which is multi-tenancy capable. Depending on which user is logged in, completely different configuration may be active. May be active for UI elements that must be rendered, may be active for things like default currencies, like user languages, the full range of internationalization, localization aspects, so it can be quite complex. And then finally, when you're looking or going back more to the technical aspects, when you think of cloud, where you have dynamic distributed systems, with elasticity, they can move over time. They can be relocated during runtime from one server to another server, because, for example, one server has too much work and the workload should be reduced. Or you then have the scalability, where you just add additional nodes and you shrink them also either down. And now when you think that's not a single application, you have a distributed system. You may have multiple presentation tier nodes, you may have multiple business tier nodes and multiple whatever service nodes with the microservices stuff that gets even worse. And now you should have to keep track when the things move around in the system, which are then your endpoints to which you have to talk. The different solutions, of course, you can do that explicitly, meaning that you still call things actively, then you have to have an abstraction on the call point level, or you do it asynchronously using messaging systems for the interaction between the components. But nevertheless, typically that these things must be configured somehow. Then let's keep off the Java EE stuff. That's nice. That's important. I also work for an enterprise. And going to the desktop or the mobile stuff. There you have applications that are more or less SE applications. They are running in one class loader, just in one VM. That's it. Basically the same you have when you're executing component tests. It's one VM that is executing your things and your tests. Or even go, let's say, look also the early part of a container that is starting up. Basically, it's an SE application. First, you have one system class loader. Also, WebLogic originally starts with one class loader because the VM only provides you with one class loader, and everything is built on top. So on that low-level part, basically, also there you have basically an SE environment. So, and then going even forward, when you look at OSGI, you have then different class loader isolation, dependency, friends, things that should be visible to each other and things that are not visible. That makes things not easier. Or Jigsaw, there I can even now not say what will be the outcome and the consequences on configuration. I think Jigsaw will come up itself with some kind of minimal configuration, but I don't have any clue how it will look like. Then finally, some advanced stuff. You can think of that also sometimes you have systems that evolve over time. So a configuration also involves. Sometimes people say, yeah, configuration, that's a static thing, that's always the same. But typically configuration, what is configuration? Basically, you do add some kind of abstract mechanism to make things changeable that you don't have to rebuild and recompile your application. That is what configuration basically is for. So when your application is evolving, typically configuration is evolving as well. I will not go into the details about the discussion, what kind of properties and aspects should be configurable and what the kind of should not be better not be configurable for having maintainable system in the long term and all that. That's a completely different topic. But nevertheless, you may have the need for versioned configuration. Then when looking at clustering, you have multiple nodes. All the nodes are consuming to a huge part the same configuration, but cluster-specific also different configuration. And now you do some, let's say, some upgrade of your software, where you, for example, you have 4 nodes, and you start on the first node and upgrade the software. You take then the second node, you upgrade the software, and the other 2 nodes are still serving the requests. So in that case of scenarios, you have then also additional complexity. And then the final famous aspects like security, type safety, tool support. you just can use a text editor, but if you have more complex things with inheritance, with different things to manage for a whole network of applications or an infrastructure platform, you might want to have a bit additional tooling, especially when you then use that also for distribution. For example, figuring out what application configuration is exactly running on that specific VM here, in that specific context, because you have some issues and it's not yet clear what are the reasons for the issues. And finally, that's the same with the upgrade. If you want to change then something centrally, for example, in a distributed system for free applications, how is that configuration change then promoted to the applications, and how can the application code react on the change, so the application perhaps still does not have to be restarted. When looking at the existing approaches, that's basically the mix-up of everything. We will have a look at some of them, but it's interesting. Okay, obviously we have some things in Java Enterprise. We have the S-word Spring, which has some abstractions. We have Apache Delta Spike in the Java EE, which adds functionality on top of CDI. There is also an Oracle metadata service, which I was a long time not aware of, which basically allows you also to do some central configuration, which is then provided and distributed to the different WebLogic servers, for example. Of course, you can have Chef and Puppet on the low level. There is one of the most famous configuration solutions is Apache Commons. But there are also other interesting frameworks or solutions around which are worth to be mentioned, like JFig. There's a Java Convict Builder, Carbon. We will see examples of them because it's quite interesting to see what the different people in the world, how they try to solve configuration as a problem area. And the combination of the things would be not a bad way of doing things, and also to see the advantages and disadvantages, how things could be solved here. And then the JDK itself provides somehow of, let's say, configuration-like stuff. Preferences API. Interesting question. How many of you already have implemented and changed the SPIs or the implementation of the Preferences API in the SDK? Not many. That's good. Don't try it because it's horrible when you want to do complex stuff with it. Okay, additionally we have properties and we have also a resource bundle. We may add some more here, but of course when you're looking at the SE level of APIs, typically it's quite low level. And last but not least, for Credit Suisse, the same is true. There is an in-house solution because people have built their own solution, because everything that is out in the wild is not flexible enough and does not really provide the things you need. So we're going through now to existing stuff. In the EE part we will start. For example, in the JUX RS we have the possibility to define our runtime delegate. We can do that by adding that class path service loader configuration. We can do that by adding in the JDK itself and changing the JUX RS properties files, or we can just set a system property. And the ordering is the ordering how it is evaluated. So first it will look up for that class path configuration. If he finds that one, he will take that as a runtime delegate. And the runtime delegate itself is not a configuration, but you can create an implementation, and give an implementation where you hopefully can tweak the implementation so it's behaving like you want it to have. But I agree, it's more an emergency solution than a real configuration that is built in. Similar is with batch, one of the newer JSRs. What's interesting in batch is that you can effectively add substitution placeholders to the configuration. they have added, they copied it, a part of the AL support part into their spec. So you can do, for example, have variables in that are replaced with system properties that you have to provide to the VM. But then it's end of the story. All the rest is not configurable out of the box. Of course, you have the XML files, but still, it's not runtime changeable. Going ahead, JPA. There is a JPA meta model that you can access, where you can see which beans are mapped and how are the mappings, everything. Looks very, very nice. But it's, of course, it's read-only. You don't can extend it, create or register additional beans or change it somehow. That would be a possible way how we can do things more flexible, but not that easy. What you can do, you can, of course, then again, using the service loader with that meta-inf services interface name part, a persistence provider. But of course, when you do that in a Java EE context, you may get into troubles because it's always an interaction between your code and what you're doing there and what then the application service is bringing along. Going ahead with more the EE7 stuff, but also there is a very, very interesting thing there. There is an alt-DD, an alternate deployment descriptor. You can set the system property that tells that he should look up for additional deployment descriptors. So he will then not only look for application.xml, he will also look for application/mystage.xml. So you have, interestingly, there a concept which for staging is not that bad, but nevertheless it looks up only your class path. So every different stage that you want to have active, you have to build in and provide it and deliver it and package it with your EAR or var out of the box. You don't have any dynamics that you can exchange things later or expression language where you can evaluate the values that you want to have to be active at runtime. In the EGP chart, there is a possibility where you can have some influence. You can, of course, configure there your own queue connection factory. Then CDI, the most important, I would say, JSR in the whole EE stack. And the good news, it's the most configurable one. When you're looking at the extension SPI of the CDI spec, you can do everything. You can remove interceptors, you can add them, you can add beans, you can remove them, you can have additional injection points, whatever you like. It's more or less completely open when you know what you must do. So perfectly, let's write an adapter and put that together with some configuration mechanism, and CDI is completely configurable. Really the good news. But the things are configurable only during deploy time. Because CDI on its deployment then is sending out that events where you can listen as an extension and change things. Then also bean validation has some things like the validator factory and the things that could be configured or changed. But that's also the end of the story. And looking at JSF, there's also an interesting mechanism, which I was a long time not aware of, is there is a so-called application configuration populator, which you can configure, and which gets access to the XML document DOM tree before JSF is taking that document as input for its startup and its deployment activities. So you have basically a hook, though I must say it's not very comfortable, but you have a hook where you can change things. Then that alt-DD feature I mentioned. So let's go ahead to the next one and go to the SE level. First, we start with Spring. It's more or less.
I've got a question. Why on earth would you want to mess with these deployment descriptors? To me, they are just part of the way the application has been built, and you suggest changing the way CDI will resolve the classes that get injected. How can I ever be sure that my application will work exactly as it did in production and in test? You should not do that.
That's not that. I would say it's not that easy because there are sometimes.
What was the question?
Yeah, sorry. He said it makes no sense to just replace things, for example, beans in CDI, because there is no clear, because then the behavior may be completely different in test than it is in production. But we effectively, we have definitely these use cases where, for example, we have in the testing environment, sometimes we have different kind of system backends, we have talked with them, sometimes even with different interfaces, but providing the same or similar things to the outside. Nevertheless, I would agree with you, if you don't have to do that, don't do it. Definitely not. And I would even say sometimes there are also, you can of course add something different. You can have some more complex bean that you then use some kind as a decorator of an existing one, which then may be capable of internally switching between one or another implementation or doing something different. Definitely for having the traceability, you should do it. You should know what you do, definitely. So I'm not saying just make everything configurable and just puzzle together everything at libitum. You have to know what you do. But there are use cases where you just need that flexibility. So going back to Spring. Basically, the idea there is you have some property files. That's the most common approach. It's not the only one. And you can then go in your Spring configuration and you can define where that application properties, for example, is lang. That's the most easier part. And then in your other bean configuration, you can reference the according values. Of course, there is, that's a bit the outdated approach here with that property placeholder configurer. Basically, what Spring has, the sense is that it has a property source where you can hook up any kind of configuration sources. It could be in a database, in a file, whatever. And is then combined with the configuration files of Spring itself. In Apache Delta Spike, it looks somehow similar. You have there a property file config, which you can implement, which provides the location where your property files are located. Then it will load that, and in your beans, you can then inject the according values by defining according annotations where you say which kind of property you want to have here. Delta Spike also will do type conversion, so you can have not only strings, but also integers or other types, if you like. Apache Commons, it's the old interface here, as it Apache Commons 1.0. The Apache Commons version 2 has some improvements in the API, which are quite interesting. But basically, similarly, you say where your properties files, for example, relies, and it will load it, and then you can access it, but you have it access it more explicitly. Then the Convict Builder, it's one thing that is heavily relying on annotations. You say, you even define the location of your stuff here in the annotations. I don't want to say that that is a good way how things should be done, because adding configuration on top of annotation, for me, it makes not real sense in that way. You can have then different locations where it looks up, and then you see also you have then here default values that you can set on different things, and there you have then some kind of injection that is happening. Another one here is the Convict Builder project. That's the continue. Actually, that's the more of that. I thought I had an example how it is at the end. No, there's no example how it is read. But it's like injection where you have lots of annotation defining what should be done. In the owner example, similar file, there you have some kind of template mechanism. You define an interface where you have the different method names, and the method names then one-to-one map to the properties in the file, and then you can go to that config factory and let that interface be implemented by the configuration system, and you will see then the values coming out of the property file in your configuration. In JFig, for example, you have then their own XML format. You can also take a different one. You have then to pass it on the command line, add your main class name, and then in your code you say initialize, and then you can read out the values from there. There is no much additional value. You just use a property file and use properties out of the box here. So I'll try to summarize. When you're looking at the existing approaches we have, most of them are key value based. It's also a good thing to do that, because the key value approach also gives you a lot of advantages, especially when you're looking at or trying to compose configuration out of multiple child configurations somehow. It typically is environment dependent, especially when you're looking for the more complex use cases in the enterprise, and not just for one property file and just pull it, read it, and give some value out of it. Of course, typically it's multi-sourced. There are different sources where you can read configuration, different files, different class path, remote resources, whatever. Typically it's multi-formatted. So it could be that in one enterprise you only use one configuration format, but looking about different companies, or even looking at evolutions that happen over time, sometimes it may be that you even have multiple formats of configuration in place. Could also be multiple formats, because you can have one file format, but additionally on top of it, you may have some configuration in a database. So the format of the database and the file typically will not be the same. In Java EE, most of the things is XML based. It's spread across multiple locations. You have multiple different deployment descriptors for different things. It's mainly build time configuration only. A few JSRs like CDI support deploy time configurations. Administrative resources in general typically are vendor specific, so the configuration files, if you want to do domain the configuration for data sources and things, despite the annotations we have got with Java EE 7, of course, it's basically vendor dependent how the format of the files look like. And for Java EE application configuration, that's mainly the thing that Delta Spike does. There is no standard at all. So if you don't have a standard, you also cannot expect that portability is given. So for example, in the third-party application case, this is important, because you then get, if you won't have such a standard, you can oblige your third-party vendors that they use the one here, the standard, and then you know that you can change things even when things are not doing the things as expected. For me, in summary, is configuration basically it's a classical cross-cutting concern. For me, it's like logging, because everybody that needs some code has sooner or later the requirement that he wants to do something to be able to be changed without recompiling your code. I would say the problem domain is well known. I would say if you talk with people, okay, different opinions, but when you talk about them, how we should model configuration, to what extent, I would say the key value store approach is the one that most of the people will support to do it that way. Then, as we have seen, we have many different solutions and ideas. Some of them are, like Apache Commons, are quite a long time already in place. As I said, there is no standard in place. Java EE lacks some flexibility for several scenarios, I know, especially the more dynamic, cloudy-like. But we also have to say in the same brief that with EE8, there are some interesting plans, management API and others that are quite useful and may be used for many of the use cases or matching the use cases we have here. Probably, or quite for sure, we don't have any Java EE configuration JSR. On SA, I do not expect that we get some standard there in the short time. There are multiple solutions there. There's not yet something like a common API or a standard. So, two things for me. One thing, engage in Java EE8. As David Blevins also this afternoon has told you, engage here, try to make EE better. It's rather simple to engage there. There are different JSRs. There's an umbrella JSR where you can do things. And the second thing is that we have currently, we are incubating an Apache project where we try to get the things running for everything, for SE as well as for EE. So we get more experience and we possibly have the chance that when this is adopted well and evolves well, that we have a chance, let's say, in some years, that we can then run a standardization effort for that kind of things. So I will now give you some insights about Apache Tamaya. That's the working name currently. When I look at the overview, what currently is the idea, what we want to do there is, basically we want to create an API that is based on SE8. So it will benefit of the SE8 features where useful. It should also be support and implementable by ME, but I would say with the constraints when ME also has added the functional aspects and features like method references and lambdas, which is planned, or Oracle has it will probably come somewhere in the future, but until then, I would say ME is not the main focus. The API, of course, should be lean, small, easy to understand, nevertheless extendable. And it should be complete. So you should be able to program against that API on SE level, and you don't have to add any implementation-specific references to the implementation, which is effectively running under the API. For environment models, the environment should support hierarchies of environments, because you have system level, for example, domain level, year level, up level, tenant, whatever. So it makes sense to have some hierarchy there, which is also done by a couple of frameworks. The main model should be key-value based, as mentioned. There should be then, on top of that, the possibility to add high-level APIs. There should be functional extension points, if we like in other JSRs, where you can add easily external functionality and abstractions to it. It should support type-safe templates, as we have shown there. I will show you also an example later. It should have layering, composites. It should be remote capable, so we can use it in SE, but we can also use it as a base for implementing configuration, deployment services, or something like that. It should support dynamic configuration. So configuration should be mutable, but mutable, nevertheless, it should be thread safe. Definitely it should be thread safe. So you can also ensure that mutability can be done, but of course it's not directly. You shouldn't have some mutable configuration where you can change things and then you can commit back the changes and then create some events going around your system so you can react on the changes. Or you can also in some cases say, my configuration is not mutable at all. So both should be supported. Of course, multi-format, multi-source, multi-type capable, that you have type safety wherever possible. It explicitly, that should be definitely one of the differentiators to other configuration services. It should support EE and CDI explicitly. And it will provide out of the box a lean but fully functional implementation based on SE8. That means still that it will interoperate with other it can interoperate with existing configuration solutions. You can use, for example, your existing Commons configuration as input providing configuration here, if you like to do that. You could possibly also the other way around using that system and hook it into Apache Commons configuration if you really want to do that. But in general, it is possible to do, I would say, most of the things that you need in configuration just with that, and it should be then have more or less no dependencies. It's not like Commons configuration where you then also have to use Commons binutil, Commons long, whatever, on top of that. One of the basic abstractions here is the property provider. It looks similar to what we have in Spring. It has proven to function quite well in Spring. Compared to Spring, one of the differences, it's not an abstract class, it's an interface. And you see from the methods here, it's a subset of the map interface, which has proven to be very useful. And on top of it, you have the possibility to convert it to a map, and you have access to additional meta information. Here, there's an example how you can build with the SE API relatively easily a property provider which reads out every configuration file which lies under meta-inf and is named config-something.xml. Then we also create a provider or access a provider which has in it all the properties that come from the system properties. And then we combine the two using the override aggregation policy where we say, okay, we use all the system properties as a base, the prof1, and combine them with the properties from our configuration file, which then are capable of overriding it, and the outcome is a new property provider which exactly implements that combination of properties. It's a very easy thing. Then the next step would be the configuration interface. It extends the property provider, so we adhere to the composite model, where you have accessors for the basic Java types like Boolean, integer, double, all that wrapper types. You also then have the possibility to use the get adapted stuff, and you also have area mechanism where you can, when you have names of properties separated by dots, where you can say, give me all properties basically that are located under A.B.C, or even deeper. And so you have the possibility to just say, give me one part of the configuration. It's like a filtering mechanism. With the with and the query operators are, let's say, quite common mechanisms how you can add external functionality to that interface. It's used in other JSR as well. You can also add listeners here on that level. But no, typically you will, I would say in some cases you will typically not work directly with that interface, because if possible, injection would be the much more elegant way to solve this. Nevertheless, you can go. Currently, the idea is that we have different configurations, could be active in a system. They currently are identified by name. Could be that we change that later. We have to discuss that. It's not, nothing is done in stone. Even the project is not yet existing. You will not not yet to Apache and look up the project. It's nothing there already. We are still in voting mode, but it looks quite good. So we should be able to start the incubation work next week. Environment, as I said, as an example, could be hierarchic with different levels. And there's an environment manager where you can access the current environment. And you can also directly go into it and say, give me a certain type of environment. So if you have, for example, that chain of environments here active in your current runtime context, and then you go for access the environment with the environment type here, you will get then the third box here, which then on top has its parent, its domain, and the parent of the domain is then the root environment. So that's basically the thing, how it works, and also the environment abstraction, basically that's the key abstraction that's necessary to serve then configuration dependent on your current runtime environment. An example of what you can do with it. First, we have a class, myTenant, where you have, for example, we can say, okay, we don't want to have to write out all the default areas that we want to use all the time. So we define that on the class level. We also have, for example, a name. It's a string, which will be then injected. If it's not there, it should, the content should be NA for not available. There is nothing, there is a configured property missing here. It should be a property again, that the configuration system knows that it's a configured property. And it will take by default without any additional value. It just will, like in the second property, just use the field name then as default. But you can also have then here the idea, multiple configured properties, because you won't first have to look up the private address. If it's not there, you look up for the business address. And here, in that case, even we have a third variant where we say, okay, in that case, we look for my qualified address, but with the brackets, this is used as an absolute name. So the my solution tenant address is not added in front of it to do the key resolution internally. Then also we see here we have a change listener, which currently is a normal property change event, and you say here that you only want to have to see changes of the name property, which obviously I must admit not makes sense because it's with the load policy initial, it's only loaded once. But basically it should be possible that you can have some configured beans, and that it's possible to re-inject things when they change. But you should be able to define if you want to happen that or not. You should have control about that. Now, how you would work with that, you create your instance, you can go to the configuration manager and say configure, that's it. Now, it's more or less the same thing. Now, that would be the template mechanism. We have the same annotations on it. The only thing that's different is that we have here methods that are returning the values. And what you can do then is you can say, configuration manager, get configuration, and you say him, I want to have that type of configuration, and he will implement, using proxies, your configuration interface and ensure that the values are there to be read out in a type-safe way. So you can have then there have a type-safe mechanisms how you get configuration into your system. This one here is a more complex example where we put together or use some of the SE features that are there, where you just use a simple map where you just add one entry to test if the overrides are functioning. Then we use the configuration builder. We say, I want to do a myTest config configuration. I want to have read configuration from test properties. On top of that, I want to have additional providers that are reading a test XML from another location. I want then combine that using override with the map that I have here configured on the first two lines. So the value of A will be overwritten with Adrian. I put that together to get a configuration instance, and then I just print it out on the line on the system print line on the out, system out. Another possibility, I could also filter providers. I can do that just by getting back another provider, which then just has that filtering in place. Of course, I could do the same thing just with the JDK8 features by just converting into a map and using the Stream API. So we have only 9 minutes left. I will nevertheless try to show you some of the things in action. Hopefully it looks not that bad with the colors. There should be a Java 1 demo. The first thing is that injection example, where you see here that we have that configured class. When you go into it, you see here basically many of the things that I have explained. We have a singleton, we have some properties, also multiple ones. And then we just put here a Welt container, access that thing, and then of course in the background there is a CDI extension active, which is actually doing the work and injecting all that configuration in that bin. And then there are two assertions here, which basically are just asserting for not null, which is not so powerful. And what you see here, if we start that, we see that in the printout that basically the things have worked quite well. It's just on one line here, but you see here, for example, here the env ADK int 5, there are numbers there. Things were injected. Some things were not injected. That is currently, there is a bug, which something of the things is not yet working, but nevertheless, of course, we have some time to further improve the implementation here. So I would say we have only 7 minutes left. I think that is the thing. We have then to go for the question part. Let's say Alt-Shift F5. One thing to remark, I would really invite everybody of you that want to join our initiative on the Apache side, contact me, come to me, so we can see how you can help on the things that we really get that project up and running. Would be really great. And that we also have, beside a couple of people, also very famous people out of the Java community, we also have a couple of companies in place that were interesting, helping here and trying to get something running. So we are with an end target. I'm currently also, what is important, the main target of the Apache project is not that we have mainly a JSR in 2 weeks, or in 2 years or something like that. Currently, the main topic is get a configuration project running that is capable of providing a really flexible, usable, easy to use mechanism, which is capable of working on SE, which has all the features I have shown you, and which also explicitly supports Java EE, and is capable of use there. And on the other side, of course, within that work, we try to get in the EE area that small parts into it that we possibly would need, that we can hook in very well with Java EE. So with that, you also in the presentation slides, you find at the end the links to many of the things and the other configuration solutions mentioned. And I just put the thank you on it for having the patience to listen to me, and if you have any questions, feel free. we have 5 minutes. If not, I'm still there. I will also tomorrow be at the Hackergarten, where also we can have a more in-deep look at the configuration solution and the code that is already there. If you want to have a look at it more in deep also, then thinking of joining, just come to me. I will be tomorrow at the Hackergarten here. And yes, thank you very much.